Welcome to the chapter on nutrition and chronic diseases. Today you will be able to discuss the relationship between risk factors and chronic diseases, describe cardiovascular disease and identify its risk factors, summarize the causes, consequences, and management of type 2 diabetes, describe the relationships between diet and cancer, outline strategies for including sufficient fruit and vegetables in the diet, and describe emerging scientific evidence of nutritional genomics. There's two types of diseases. There's infectious and chronic. So infectious disease would be something you get and can be treated with something like antibiotics, but chronic disease is something that develops over time, such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Our body has natural immunity, but we also have in our community preventative measures by public health services to help us stay healthy. These include things like vaccine, sanitation, clean water supply. In the United States, some of the leading causes of death are influenced by diet. Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer all could have dietary contributors and are leading causes of death in the United States. Here are the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Topping the list, heart disease for both men and women. Then cancers, chronic lung diseases, accidents, strokes, Alzheimer's, diabetes, pneumonia, and influenza, kidney disease, and suicide. Risk factors are correlated with diseases. These are traits, conditions, or lifestyle habits that increase people's chances of developing diseases. However, infectious diseases have a single cause, for example, exposure to a specific pathogen. Chronic diseases have many factors in common. Excessive alcohol intake is associated with many chronic diseases, lack of physical activity, smoking or tobacco use, and poor diet. So here's some chronic disease risk factors. Advancing age would be a risk factor for atherosclerosis or hardening of the arteries, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, cancer. Family history would be a risk factor for all of those. Now, if we look at atherosclerosis by itself, hypertension can be a risk factor for that. Diabetes, atherosclerosis, and hypertension can be risk factors. Obesity can be risk factors for several things as well. And high blood LDL and triglycerides can be a risk factor for atherosclerosis. So there is an interrelationship among chronic diseases. We do know that obesity, especially abdominal obesity, so if you're apple shaped, it contributes to more of these chronic diseases. So certain cancers are related to obesity. We do know that type 2 diabetes is related to excess body weight, which can cause insulin resistance and thus type 2 diabetes. We can see atherosclerosis as a result of abnormal blood lipids in those obese individuals, and along with obesity tends to run hypertension. Now, cardiovascular disease, which may be abbreviated CVD, is a disease of the heart and blood vessels. In fact, it's the leading cause of death in the United States for both men and women. And examples of cardiovascular diseases, since it's a whole group of them, includes hypertension, coronary heart disease, and stroke. Now, atherosclerosis is the term used for hardening of the arteries. Now, no one is completely free of all signs of atherosclerosis. In fact, in autopsies done of 2-year-olds, they've seen some atherosclerosis starting that young. So the question really is, how far has it advanced and what can be done to slow down or reverse it? Now, we do know that hypertension and atherosclerosis are interrelated and accelerate each other. As most people age, atherosclerosis progresses steadily. Here's pictures of that happening. So coronary arteries bring nourishment to the heart muscle. If one of these arteries becomes blocked by plaques or the hardening of the arteries, that part of the heart muscle that it feeds will die. Here's a picture of blood vessels where plaques begin to form, and another picture of well-developed plaques now established. If it comes completely blocked, we would have a heart attack. So we're reducing our blood flow. So the development of atherosclerosis involves plaque development, blood clot formation, and hypertension. Blood clots form from a thrombus or a stationary clot. The tissue death is called a thrombosis. They can form from an embolus or an embolism. Now, when an artery is blocked, it may swell and burst, causing an aneurysm. So we hear about that typically in the brain. A hemorrhage, which is when blood leaks rapidly when a blood vessel bursts. And atherosclerosis raises our blood pressure. A high blood pressure also accelerates atherosclerosis. So here are the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. We have non-modifiable risk factors, nothing we can do to change this. Increasing age, male gender, and family history of heart disease. But we can modify these factors. If we have high blood LDL, we can work to reduce saturated fats and trans fats in our diet. If we have low blood HDL, we can exercise more. If we have high blood triglycerides, we can limit the simple sugars, get more fatty fish in our diet. And if we have high blood pressure, we can limit the sodium, we can lose weight. If we have diabetes, we can watch our carbs and lose weight. Also, obesity, especially central obesity, is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, as is physical inactivity, cigarette smoking, excessive alcohol consumption, high intake of sodium, and an atherogenic diet, which would be one high in saturated fats, trans fats, low in vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Another term you will want to know for this chapter is metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome includes any 3 or more of the following. So you don't have to have all of them, but you have to have 3 to be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. So high fasting blood glucose, central obesity, hypertension, low blood high density lipoprotein, HDL are good one, and high blood triglycerides, so high blood fats. Any of those 3, and you can get diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, which greatly increases your risk for other chronic diseases. Here are the adult standards for blood lipids. This may be a test question, so you might want to put a star by it, like if so-and-so has a blood cholesterol level of 250, is this normal or not? That would actually be an unhealthy blood cholesterol level. So ideally, it's below 200 total, our LDL below 100, our HDL above 60, and our triglycerides at fasting would be less than 150. If we're not fasting, when we have these blood tests taken, it will elevate our triglyceride level. There is a quiz you can take online through the American Heart Association. I encourage you to do it. You go online and you can actually calculate your own heart attack risk factors. You put in your gender, your age, if you're a smoker, family history, those sorts of things, and it will calculate if you are at high risk or not. All right, so we know physical inactivity has been linked with some chronic diseases, including heart disease. So we do want to talk about ways to increase that. We know that physical activity is beneficial for a number of ways, and these are some ideas. You can coach a sport, you can garden, you can hike, bike, or walk to nearby stores or classes, mow, trim, and rake by hand, park a block from your destination and walk, play a sport, play with children, take classes for credit in dancing, sports, conditioning, or swimming, take the stairs, not the elevator, walk your dog, walk every day, wash your car with extra vigor, or bend and stretch to wash your toes in the bath, work out in a fitness club, work out with friends, give away 2 labor-saving devices to someone who needs them, lift small hand weights while talking on the phone, reading email or watching TV, stretching often during the day. Here's recommendations for reducing cardiovascular disease risk. Look at lifestyle changes such as increasing physical activity, lose weight if you're overweight, implement dietary changes, so less saturated fat and trans fat, more healthy fats, more whole grains, fruits and vegetables. Treat diseases you already have, reduce exposure to tobacco smoke, control alcohol intake, learn your family history, know your blood pressure. You also should know the signs of a heart attack for this chapter. That would be pain or discomfort in the jaw, neck, or back, feeling weak, lightheaded, or faint, chest pain or discomfort in the arms or shoulders, and shortness of breath. Now, do know that the symptoms for men and women may be different, and for a lot of women, they don't have these classical signs, but they will complain of nausea, and sometimes just a pain between their shoulder blades. So they can be very different for men and women. Also recognize your salt or sodium intake. Most Americans eat way more sodium than they should and not enough potassium. So increase your potassium intake. That helps control your blood pressure. Reduce your cardiovascular disease risk also by reducing fat intake, especially saturated and trans fat, limit refined starches and added sugars, eat fruits, vegetables, whole grains, eat foods rich in omega-3 fatty acids, talk to your doctor about nutrient supplements, drugs, or herbal remedies, and manage lifestyle changes. Here are our recommendations. Saturated fat less than 7% of total calories, and that could lead to an 8 to 10% reduction in LDL. If we lose our weight because we're overweight, if we lose 10 pounds, that could be a 5 to 8% reduction in LDL. If we eat 5 to 10 grams of soluble fiber like that found in oatmeal per day, that could be a reduction in LDL of 3 to 5%. So all of these things add up. Another chronic disease would be diabetes. Well over a third of the U.S. adults have prediabetes, which means they're on their way to diabetes. It can be reversed if you catch it in the pre-diabetic stage, but most people just let it progress. So that's just your warning sign that you're on your way to diabetes unless you do something now. And usually weight loss and increasing physical activity and eating a better diet tends to reverse that early on. The 2 common forms of diabetes are type 1 and type 2. Type 1 accounts for 5 to 10% of all cases, so not very much. And usually it starts in childhood or adolescence, but it can begin at any age, even late in life. It is increasing in prevalence by about 3% each year. We think that type 1 is caused by an autoimmune disorder where our body, for some reason, attacks our pancreas, which produces insulin, and then we can't produce our insulin anymore. So type 1 diabetics have to take insulin for the rest of their life. Type 2 diabetes, which is the majority of the diabetes we see, 90 to 95%, is closely linked with obesity. It's been on the rise among children and adolescents, so we no longer call this adult onset obesity like we used to. We just call it type 2. And it happens because of insulin resistance. We have an inadequate response to the body's cells to the hormone insulin. It's just not getting sugar where it needs to be. And that is related to obesity. So insulin resistance causes glucose and insulin to build up in the bloodstream. The blood glucose concentration rises. The overtaxed cells of the pancreas begin to fail and reduce their insulin output while blood glucose soars further out of control. Symptoms of type 2 diabetes would be intense hunger, frequent urination, and intense thirst. If you recognize the symptoms of diabetes, seeking treatment is an important step for protecting your health. Get your annual physical done, have blood work done, get a fasting blood glucose, get your cholesterol checked. What can happen with diabetes? Well, a lot of damage inside our blood vessels happens with diabetes. So atherosclerosis progresses rapidly in those with diabetes because anytime we have high blood sugar, it's damaging our blood vessels and increasing those plaque deposits. Risk factors for type 2 diabetes are advancing age, family history, and having overweight or obesity. Now, with diabetes, we can see impaired kidney, eye, and nerve function, diminished blood circulation and nerve function, tendency to develop slow-healing injuries and infections, reduced blood flow to the kidney damages them, poor circulation to the eyes impairs vision and leads to blindness. To prevent it, you want to know your family history. A diagnosis can be made using any of several tests as fasting plasma glucose or non-fasting A1C. What you can do is lose weight if you're overweight, be physically active, choose your diet with care, and control your carbohydrate intake. Reduce saturated fat intake to less than 10% of calories. Limit trans fat as much as possible. Protein intake should be individualized. Alcohol intake should be moderate. Pay strict attention to dietary guidelines for Americans, particularly concerning intakes of nutrient-dense foods, sodium, saturated fat, and added sugars. The second leading cause of disability and death in the United States is cancer. Prevention of cancer is preferable to a potential for a cure. Risk factors would be our lifestyle factors and environmental exposures, some dietary components, as well as overeating. Cancer arises in the genetic material inside a person's cells. This process is called carcinogenesis. It begins when the cell's genetic material sustains damage from a carcinogen, such as radiation, a free radical, or another cancer-causing chemical. Damage occurs every day and is repaired by the cell. On failure to repair itself, the cell dies by cellular suicide, preventing its progeny to inherit faulty genes. When a damaged cell doesn't die, the immune system destroys such cells. When the immune system falters, a tumor is formed. Life-threatening cancer begins with an event called initiation. There's also promoters that can stimulate tumor growth. Okay, so here's our risk-benefit relationships. In figure 1110, so this is referring to our cancer, what's of benefit and our risks. So take a look at that in your book. Here is how cancer progresses from normal cells. We have initiation, promotion, and further tumor development. We have a carcinogen, enters a normal cell and alters the cell DNA, inducing uncontrolled cell division. Promoters enhance the development of abnormal cells, resulting in formation of a tumor, and then cancerous tumor releases cells into the bloodstream or lymphatic system. That's when it spreads or metastasizes. Cancer risk factors would be advancing age, family history, chronic inflammation, diet, weakened immunity, infections, obesity and estrogen, alcohol with smoking, fats and fatty acids. There are carcinogens in red and processed meats, so we do know that eating red and processed meats increases our risk for colorectal cancer. Cooking methods, grilling tends to increase our risk of it. Eating foods with that are burned, high iron, lots of fried foods, also overexposure to the sun and exposure to radiation increases our risk factors. A key to evaluating the safety of foods is the frequency of consumption. So we can eat these foods occasionally, but we want to have balance and variety in our diet. So evidence continues to accumulate in favor of fiber-rich foods. Whole foods and phytochemicals reduce oxidative damage to cell structures. Some phytochemicals are thought to act as anti-carcinogens. So we want to eat a diet with more whole grains, more fruits and vegetables. Supplements of vitamins and nutrients have not been proved to prevent cancer. Alcohol is a carcinogen, so we want to use alcohol sparingly or abstain from use. Achieve and maintain a healthy body weight throughout life. Engage in regular physical activity. Whenever people's food intakes are limited, the onset of cancer is delayed. This is known as the caloric effect. Here's steps to minimize carcinogen formation during cooking. Marinate meats before cooking and roast or bake them in the oven. When grilling, line the grill with foil or wrap the food in foil. Take care not to burn foods. Limit intakes of crispy, browned French fries and chips or other well-browned foods. Here's recommendations for reducing your cancer risk. Reduce body fatness, increase physical activity, follow a more plant-based food diet, limit alcohol, limit consumption of processed meats, and aim to meet your nutrient needs through diets, not through dietary supplements. So there is a complementary and alternative medicine, and it is a group of diverse medical and healthcare systems, practices, and products that are not considered to be part of conventional medicine. So these are herbal medicines, acupuncture, things like that. There is a worst case of this, the use of the drug Laetrile, which was a complementary and alternative medicine treatment for cancer. It was a hazardous choice because it's high cyanide content. A curious case of anosmia, the loss of sense of smell, occurred due to a zinc gel being squirted in the nose. And these products are not always tested for safety, so be careful when you're trying to cure with herbs and things like that. Also, they can be mislabeled, and not everyone has the knowledge to know how to use them. The DASH diet, we've talked about this briefly before, but people who consume adequate, balanced, calorie-controlled, moderate, and varied diet recommended by the dietary guidelines for Americans enjoy a longer, healthier life than those who do not. So the DASH diet stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It emphasizes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fat-free or low-fat milk, and milk products. So here is proper nutrition shielding against diseases. So if we have a diet high in fiber and fluid, high in fruit, low in saturated and trans fats, high in whole grains, little or no alcohol, high in vegetables, adequate in nutrients, moderate in calories and salt, and attention to food safety, we can help ward away some of these things here. Okay, now let's talk about nutritional genomics. Can it deliver on its promises? So genomics is a study of genes in an organism and their interactions with environmental factors. A genome is the full complement of genetic material in the chromosomes of a cell. Once a disease-associated variant is observed in the genetic profile, the healthcare provider can employ lifestyle choices and treatment options to minimize the potential for harm. Genes influence nutrition and disease, so small variations in DNA sequences, called mutations, dictate many of the differences among human beings. The most common mutations are single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. So there is a whole field called nutritional genomics. So basically with this, you could have a genetic profile done and we would see that you're at risk for certain diseases, and we could assign you a diet that was built specifically for you, specifically for your genetic profile. So this is up and coming. It's not widespread, and it still needs some research, but that may be the way of the future. All right, epigenetics. An epigenome are proteins and other molecules associated with chromosomes that affect the expression of genes, so turning genes on and off. It's inherited or altered. It plays a role in cell differentiation. Regulation includes the workings of large globular proteins, or histones or methyl groups. And there are future generation effects on embryonic development. There may be health implications of consuming whole foods, so there may be some bioactive constituents in whole foods. Here are 2 epigenetic factors in gene activity. So when methyl groups attach to certain spots on GNA, genes are silenced. Histone tails interact with chemical signals from surrounding environment to modify gene activity on the associated length of DNA. Genes on wrapped sections of DNA are silenced, and genes on exposed sections of DNA are expressed. Here's the timeline of an epigenome, and the degree of influence decreases over time. So here's some arguments surrounding genetic testing. For nutritional genomics to be of practical value, people must undergo genetic testing. It helps detect gene variants that affect nutrition or nutrition-related disease. For a few $100s, consumers can easily order DNA tests for themselves over the internet. Questions on whether testing translates to better health or whether it's a waste of healthcare dollars are still out there. Even DNA tests are, even when they're legitimate, interpreting the results is complex. Without the will to improve health behaviors, it's unlikely that personal genetic testing alone can improve the health of the population in the future. That is all I have for Chapter 11. Don't forget to take the quiz.